Hey everyone, my name is Ryan Griggs, and I'm the host of the Regenaissance podcast. And alongside me today, I have Dax Hansen with Oatman Farms. Thank you, Dax, for joining me.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Ryan.
So, I guess to really get started, whenever I was looking up at the website and everything, there's so much that drew to my attention. The fact that you're a fourth generational farmer, and the fact that the transition from cotton alfalfa to now to what you're doing with wheat. And the biggest thing that really drew my attention is where you're located in the Sonoran Desert, which, for the listeners that don't know, that's the hottest desert in America. And so I really wanted to talk a lot about that too, because I'm
Mhm.
really curious to hear about your experiences through all of that. I guess to really get started, yeah, if you could just give a brief history of Oatman Farms dating back to whenever it first started.
Sure, absolutely. So the official name of the farm, the ranch, is called Oatman Flats Ranch, and then we have a food company, consumer packaged goods company called Oatman Farms, and both of those names go back to really a place that is located along the Gila River in southwestern Arizona. The area that my farm is located on is called Oatman Flat. It is a flood plain, a flat that was named after a family that had some misfortune there. So there was a family called the Oatmans that were traveling out west in 1851, and they ended up as a 10 member family. Um, 8 of them or 7 of them ended up getting massacred by Indians at the time, and the 2 daughters were taken captives as slaves. One of them ended up surviving that ordeal. That's Olive Oatman, and she was pretty famous in Old West history because she was one of the first people who had been tattooed on her chin. I think that was part of actually her being integrated into the Mojave tribe. Her brother Lorenzo ended up he was knocked senseless, but he ended up surviving the attack and recovering and ended up finding her. And so in the historical literature, that place is called Oatman Flat because of that incident. But the history of that place goes back much further. Native Americans had been living there and farming there for thousands of years. The Spanish Jesuits who came up from Mexico had stopped in those places, had stopped at Oatman Flats Ranch and recorded their encounters with the Native Americans in their diaries. The Mormon Battalion came through there, the Pony Express, the Butterfield Stage, Southern Immigrant Trail. So, like everything you can think of in Old West history happened there, right? And so, in my family, and there's the story in 1955 when my grandpa and grandma bought that place and started farming it. So that's been where the Hansens have settled. If there's a place where the Hansens love or they like to gather, it's been Oatman Flats Ranch. So I can tell you more about it, but that's really the sort of the origin story of the place. I liken it to like the Hidden Valley Ranch dressing as a kid. I was growing up and I read about Hidden Valley Ranch. I wanted to go there, right? And Oatman Farms, Oatman Flats Ranch is a place where we want people to come. We're committed to like radical transparency and telling our story. And it is a fascinating story on many levels. And so I'm glad that you found some things in it that interested you. Um, Maybe just to kind of continue, my grandpa started down there running cattle to begin with. Um, but he that area had actually been farmed by one of the settlers early on. It had been run with cattle, but then during World War II, someone grew some cotton out there, and so that area ended up having a cotton base to it that could be transferred to another location. So my grandpa transferred the cotton up closer to the Phoenix area, Mesa, where he was farming other farms, ran cattle, but then eventually just moved his primary operation down to Open Flats Ranch and grew cotton primarily is the primary crop. for all of his career, until he ended up passing, and that's where there was kind of a transition to me. But yeah, it was conventionally farmed with cotton. Maybe so. The most of the crops in the area are alfalfa. It's primarily alfalfa. A lot of Arizona supports the dairy complex. It's corn silage, some cotton. You can grow almost anything in Arizona because you've got a lot of sun, as long as you have water, and then if you have the right sort of inputs. And so a lot of Arizona farmers use a lot of liquid fertilizers, and and with that you can grow a lot of things. But I don't personally believe that that's the best way to grow them. And where we are at Oatman Flats Ranch, we really have been short on water. The area as a whole only it gets less than 5 inches of rain a year. We have some wells, but those wells have like the water tables drop significantly over this decades long period of drought or aridification or desertification, whatever you want to call it. And so and the soils got dried out, bleached out. uh, when you farm with flood irrigation, as most people do in Arizona, with salty soils, the ground basically becomes sterile. So you end up with ground that's about to blow away, just like a modern day Dust Bowl. And that's what's happening in Arizona and in a lot of the West, which is what led me to try to uh, institute a whole new program out there with regenerative agriculture to keep it alive. So hopefully that's good background. I'll pause there, see if you got any other comments, and I can take the rest of the story whichever direction you want to go.
Yeah, no, that was incredible. I mean, there's a lot of directions I could definitely take that. But the first one, so it's conventionally farmed from your father, and then you
Mhm.
took it over. I noticed too on the website, it mentioned that did the farm almost go under?
It did. I mean, maybe this is a good place just to note that I have professionally been a blockchain and a fintech lawyer. That even though I come from farming and ranching roots and multiple generations before me, the that my dad encouraged all his kids to become doctors and lawyers as a way to really survive, right? That farming and I mean, agriculture is a tough business, and even though my family has been farming and ranching and rodeoing, and those are the things that I deeply admire. Oftentimes, it doesn't pay the bills,
Hmm.
and so when my grandpa died and my grandma died, the farm went to my aunts and uncles. They did their best to maintain it, but they ended up just needing to lease it out to somebody to farm because farming was too expensive for them to handle. And as I mentioned, it's like extreme sports. Like it's almost impossible to farm out there with limited water, right? I mean, if you've
Hmm.
got abundant water, as I said, and you got all the inputs you want, you can almost grow anything. But if don't have any water or you have very limited water, it's like game over,
Yeah.
right? And so that farm that could have been grown with cotton or alfalfa. I mean, so the farm is it's 665 acres, and we're currently growing close to 400 acres of wheat. Plus, we have a bunch of grazing land with conventional cover on it. But we did some calculations based on the amount of water that we had available to us. We probably could have only planted about 40 acres, maybe upwards of 80 acres of alfalfa or cotton,
Hmm.
right? And so for all of those various reasons, the farmer who had leased the place wasn't able to really make a go of it. And my aunts and uncles were going to sell it. I couldn't bear to lose it because that's our family legacy, and all of the deep history from so many other cultures is represented there. that I jumped in, and even though I'm a full-time practicing attorney, um, I said I'd bite off farming. My wife was supportive of that, and it's been a wild ride going on 5 years to try to pull something that was almost dead into something that is living and robust. And now we're trying to find, the business model, the agricultural business model that would allow that to flourish. And I think that we're onto something that will help the entire region.
That's awesome. And I mean, one of the big reasons why I've started this podcast is to really share these stories because there's so many ranches and farms throughout America. I mean, throughout the rest of the world that fourth, fifth generation to where there's so many stories passed down. There's that legacy piece that I've really noticed, and I mean, that's really beautiful. So there's I guess, two questions I really had. The first one would be, whenever you were growing up, did you work out on the land, or yeah, were you really immersed with all that? And that's part of the reason that kind of brought you back. I was really curious about your upbringing from that.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. It's a great question. Um, so I grew up as a kid all around that farm and around the farming and the ranching and riding horses and other things that's happening in my family. Um, uh, and um, and so like I have a lot of really fond memories of a kid of just being out there like feral, just running around in the farm and looking at the all the history out there, the petroglyphs and chasing snakes and swimming in the ditches and all the rest that's available there. Walking through the river and finding animals and so like it was a really fond place and as a kid I read like the Hardy Boys and the Three Investigator books
Yeah,
and this was as good of an adventure as that, like it
yeah,
literally like it was an adventure with like complete with treasure, hidden treasure, and all the rest, right? That you could find and money, and I had a metal detector, and so I did that. My dad, even though he worked on that ranch early on as a teenager, and actually flew a airplane back and forth so he can get those hot dates in between. Um, our family was the one family of the whole extended family that actually didn't take a turn living and working down there because by that point my dad had become a concrete pumper. He had a fleet of concrete pumping trucks, and that's what he did instead. And actually, I felt like I got gypped, Ryan, right? Because all of my cousins had a chance to live out there, and I heard all the farming stories, and they're out there with the siphon tubes, and they're out there driving the trucks and the tractors, and swimming across the river on horses. And so, even though I got some of that, I didn't have to go work the land as the farmer, and so very interestingly, like I mean, my family, like we don't come from like we're not wealthy people, right? And uh, even though we're all hardworking people, and so by the time like we faced as a family this crisis, I think I was one of the only people in the whole extended family who had the ability to just step in and keep the farm in the family, right? And so it turned out to be a real blessing that my dad and mom encouraged us to go become professionals so that I get to have my turn in agriculture here later in life.
yeah.
And believe me, I'm getting an education where I've had to figure out soil science and hydrology and animal husbandry and bacterial and fungal interrelations and meteorology and all the rest. And there's nothing like having sort of a ticking clock with a lot of debt and expenses to really force you to learn all of those disciplines. And so I'm I'll happily claim that I am a farmer and a rancher, but I end up using some amazing people on my team. I have a great farm manager and multiple people who live down at the farm who do a lot of the hard work, and we have some livestock, animal husbandry folks there too. It's a very active place, and so I would say it's really like a team sport. that it takes a little bit of, I mean, it takes the best and brightest that we can gather and to put into this problem of really climate change and destructive industrial agriculture. And so I do think that as a trained as an attorney, I've had a really good set of skills for problem solving that I can bring to solving agricultural problems, even though I'm not the one out there driving the tractor. And believe me, I'd like to drive the tractor and be the one out there irrigating every day, but someone has to make the money to pay for this conversion. And so I understand that's my highest and best use at the moment. But yeah, I'm quite envious of the people who get to spend every day on my farm while I'm, in front of a computer. But it's just sort of a shared responsibility.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think that's a great transition too. So you were able to take over the place. Did you just create a formal plan, or did you hire people right off the bat to really make it a team plan? What was that like whenever you first
Hmm.
took that over?
Okay, so when I bought it, when my wife and I bought the place, we went out there and just took an assessment, right? And at that point, I mean, there's actually before and after photos posted on our Instagram site. If you look at on Instagram for Oatman Farms, you can see the before photos, but it's very desolate, right? Like there was nothing growing, nothing, no green. There were trees growing in the fields. The ditches were all broken and full of sand. No equipment. The farmhouse had been completely slashed. All the wells were broken. Most of them were and sunken in, and so like nothing was working, right? And all we had were um, gophers and rattlesnakes out there. And so I was like, holy cow, like what are we going to do here? And when I started repairing the wells, I realized that one of our main wells, our most heavy, producing wells on the north side of the farm, on the north side of the Gila River, had had really what's the word? It had like caved in, collapsed from being old and probably misuse.
Hmm.
And and so I just realized, oh my gosh, like I was not going to have enough water to farm the way even we could have my grandpa farmed before. Um, and I stumbled across, it's a longer story, but some experts down at Mission Garden in Tucson, Jesus Garcia, Dina Cowan, and others who had been bringing back like the Brazilian agriculture from, centuries before in Arizona down in Tucson. And when they came up to the farm, they helped me see that there is a different way, like that there are crops like Weissen or wheat that has gotten used to the hot conditions, very little water. It's very hardy. There's other crops like agave and prickly pear that we can grow. And so all of a sudden, I wasn't limited to just alfalfa and cotton
Hmm.
and quarantine enough water for. Like there was a whole new way. And so it was it became pretty clear from the almost discouraging conditions I started with that I was going to have to go with a low water consuming native crop model. And so that put me into this path of people who know desert agriculture, right? And it's not that very large of a community, but then that sort of spawns into the regenerative community, like with the Regenerative Organic Alliance and Kiss
Hmm.
the Ground, and I rapidly became friends with all of those movers and shakers, and have been able to attract like the best attention, uh, uh, because we're the only regenerative organic certified farm in the entire Southwest United States right now,
Wow.
right?
Okay.
And so we were able to get some of these people. I got a farm manager early on who was crazy enough to help me try to bring the farm back into place. I had several great farm hands who, were working, all of us, working out there, 125-degree weather in the middle of the summer, and the sand blowing, dust blowing into your eyes, because we didn't have it covered yet. Like we didn't have grass growing. It was like pretty desolate conditions. Um, And so for me, I've had just like an A team, a small team, and then the number of people who have been, wanting to participate, study it, for instance, has grown over time, including some ranchers who have wanted to collaborate with me. I mean, it just becomes obvious if you do regenerative agriculture, you need animals out there too, and the type of agriculture that I'm growing is really helpful for livestock. Um, and so, that the amount of activity out there, the number of people has grown, but it's been a pretty desperate situation from a financial perspective, where I have to grow kind of slowly, um, because I can't afford to just hire like a whole army of people to come out and work there.
Yeah. How trying to see how I can best formulate that because how have you been able to manage it from the financial standpoint, especially paired with the fact that you hardly get any rain?
Hmm.
Because I'm curious if there have been any years to where, yeah, you just had issues with just water as a whole, and how you've been able to manage that, especially from a financial
Hmm.
standpoint.
Yeah. So um, the rain matters for a lot of reasons. One, it can help recharge the aquifer, but it also matters because as I mentioned earlier, there's parts of the farm that we couldn't irrigate, right? Like we didn't have enough water coming out of the wells, and so we first planted this conservation cover, native grasses and forbs. We drilled that in with a no-till drill, and then we hoped for the monsoon rains, right? That the monsoon rains usually come in, could like get things growing.
Hmm.
And the first 2 years after we planted it, we didn't get any monsoons. And even now, like it's still not growing in a lot of areas, but we were able to put a little bit of irrigation on, put some animals out. So so that was tough, right? Like there's areas that we couldn't do anything on without the rain. The 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 wells that we have, it pumps from the groundwater, and um, so as long as those wells are working, we've got enough water to get things wet, but we don't have an excess amount of water, right? And it is expensive because those wells run on electricity, and then those
Mm.
wells often break, right? And so like it was $500,000 just to go through the wells and kind of clean them up. We didn't deepen anything. We just kind of got them to where they were kind of basically functioning, but they're pretty small wells. And so that water is really expensive, right? And every time you have to pull a well, costs a lot of money. And so that's been tough. I have borrowed money from the farm credit system, Ag West, I think is what they're called now. Amazing resource. I would encourage your listeners to check into. They really are designed to bank farmers. And then I mentioned, I talk a little bit on my website, Oatman Farms, about farmers love Bitcoin.
Hmm.
Because I was early to Bitcoin, I had some Bitcoin. I didn't really want to sell it, but I was able to sell a good chunk of it, to pay for that first year of a lot of the operating loans, right? And so, I mean, just to be completely transparent, I'm still feeling my way through that. Like that it's not just the water, but it's buying the equipment, the operating costs, for labor, for diesel, for equipment rentals, for labor. It adds up, and so at the moment we're deeply in the hole, which is where I think that's where consumers come in, right? And users come in, eaters come in, right? And that's why I was willing to do a podcast with you, is that people just need to understand that, like, we can either continue the status quo, or we're going to run out of farmland and the food's going to be very unhealthy for us, or we pivot and we start fixing our farmland and recognize that you have to like catch up, you have to pay a debt, and that's going to cost more, right? And the food's going
Hmm.
to cost more. But my philosophy on this and my strategy has been to grow the very best products the very best way with the most integrity that are suited to my region, and then to make the highest value, tastiest, most delicious products that come off of it and tried to encourage users to support us in that. And so we grow this amazing grain that has this amazing terroir of the Southwest. Some of the world's best grain is grown in Arizona anyway. And if you grow it without inputs, it ends up, just, I mean, it's as clean and natural as it gets, and we're weaning ourselves off of, the sort of the losing system there. Then we make some amazing flour that we sell to people. We use Barton Springs Mill. It looks like you're in Austin, probably,
Yeah.
but Barton Springs
Yeah.
Mill in Derby Springs, Artisan Mill, James Brown, they mill up our flour so you can buy it from
Hmm.
them. Consumers can in 2.5 pound or 5 pound bags, and restaurants can order from us. We make sourdough bread and pancake mixes that are amazing as well. And then we've recently started making vanilla extract, where we make the neutral grain spirit out of our regenerative organic certified white Sonora wheat, and just pair that up with organic Madagascar vanilla beans, and we craft distill and barrel age it. So we're releasing another product that comes from our wheat. And so my hope and my plan is that consumers will buy those products from me and from other farmers at the price point that allows us to cover our costs, right?
Yeah.
And and uh, and right now, like the price that we price it at is expensive, but it would allow us to cover our costs just barely. And so if we got a lot of people to buy it, we could afford to do it year in and day in, year out. And we're finding other models, right? Like we're partnering up with these livestock operators, who are running the cattle or the sheep. Really, they're focused on sheep, but we may run some cattle too with them. But where you can get some additional value off of the farm, somebody's going to get it from this grass and other forage that we can easily grow, and then the animals leave us their fertilizer, right? So my sort of mantra is that we at Oatman Flats Ranch grow wheat, meat, and sweets, right? So wheat or barley, like we partnered up with some folks for some like non-alcoholic beer programs. Wheat and barley, small grains. Meat would be lamb and probably beef, and then sweets are like agave and mesquite. But that's where I wouldn't normally like pick those things, but that's what our region tells us we can responsibly grow. And so I think we need to develop the markets for those products. And everybody where they are should figure out what products should they be growing in their region, or maybe what's heirloom in their region, and then develop the markets for those things, and focus on our local systems, right? But from Arizona, we can service a lot of the Southwest with this amazing set of products that we're growing.
No, I wholeheartedly agree with that sentiment of localization. I mean, especially when you think about produce and where that's coming from, that's very important. On the topic of wheat, because this
Yeah.
was one of the big things I really want to discuss. So my whole life, I had terrible gut issues, did not get any answers growing up. And I remember I had just started my job when I moved down to Austin a couple years ago, and one of my coworkers was talking about her gut issues and whatnot. And I was telling her all my symptoms, and she's like, "You should just try taking out gluten for a weekend."
Hmm.
And I did
Hmm.
that exactly, and all of my symptoms went away immediately. And I know
Hmm.
obviously that's happening a lot here. You hear people all the time talking about, I went to Italy and had pasta and I could eat all of the gluten I wanted and I felt great. And then came
Hmm.
back and the same issues persisted.
Hmm.
So I guess if you just want to talk about why that issue is just such a major issue in America now. I know with glyphosate and emulsifiers and all these additives that you add, because you
Hmm.
go to the grocery store and sourdough, for example, there should only be a few ingredients. You look at the label and just, why is there 15, 20 scientific experiments going on in this bread?
Hmm.
So yeah, I'm just curious to hear your input on just all of wheat and why it's such an issue, but then why yours is so much better and to where we could
Hmm.
actually eat it, digest it, and it's good for us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very important topic because I think there's a lot of confusion about this, and actually, I think there's a little bit of smoke and mirrors, right? Like that people are blaming the wrong things and maybe reaching the wrong conclusions. I would encourage people to read a book called Where Your Food Comes, or no, it's called What Your Food Ate. What Your Food Ate came out, I think, last year, which lays out, I mean, it'll open your eyes on a lot of things, but including gluten. But but the way I think about it is that, I mean, gluten is just a protein, okay, um, and a lot of grains naturally had that protein in it, and I don't think that it's bad. I think it's actually really good and it's healthy for people. There's some people who have like celiac disease, and and we've certainly all developed more like autoimmune disorders and allergies and everything else. But if you follow me just kind of linearly on this journey, I'll just say that like there's nothing bad about gluten. Gluten's good to start with. We have screwed it up by breeding all sorts of different types of wheat together to focus on yield, right? Like if you think about, and we go back and read like Norman Borlaug and all the rest who are trying to feed the world during famine, during the Green Revolution, that we ended up taking like these mutant, like Japanese short wheat stalks, and then crossing them with like some high yielding wheat varieties, and then but they were developed with the idea that you'd put a bunch of liquid fertilizer on them and herbicides, and then they would grow, right? And so just like there are a lot of wheat breeders and other breeders who do amazing work, and we are growing one modern variety of wheat on our farm. So like I'm not castigating wheat breeders, but I would just say it doesn't, for me, it doesn't, it's not a far-fetched conclusion to think that once you start just like working with defects, you know, uh, um, trying to breed different things together, you end up screwing up gluten and everything else about that wheat, right? And so a lot of the wheat that we have has been intentionally developed so that you get a lot of yield per acre, and it wasn't developed for health. It wasn't developed for flavor. It was developed so we could just get a lot of it. Okay, and so for me, like dialing it back, I went to these land race and heirloom varieties that haven't been manipulated at all, right? So I grew white Sonora wheat. That's a heritage variety, land race. Nobody's crossed that with anything, right? Bluebeard Durham, similarly ancient grain like a Durham, right? Red Fife, similar. So for me, it's like I just didn't want to have to wonder, like what's
Hmm.
happened to this thing. I go with the original versions, and then we found from the Washington State University Bread Lab, there was a variety of wheat that's called Skagit 1109 that was developed by Dr. Stephen Jones and Stephen Lyon uh, for the Skagit Valley like tulip farmers, and it was bred for flavor, to use the whole grain in your food, right? Like so, it was very intentionally selected, and it turns out that that's like a really good tasting, healthy bread flour. And so I've been growing this modern variety so that we have opportunities to pair it up with the heirloom varieties that maybe don't perform quite as consistently the way that people expect like a bread flour to work, but you
Hmm.
can pair it up and get amazing bread out of it. But for me, it's back to just like there's individual tastes and flavors, and people have different health needs. But I have not yet found anybody who's tried our mixes, our pancake mixes, which by the way are 100% heirloom variety, and it's 97%. Or actually, the pancake mixes are 100% whole grain. I've never met anybody who has had like a gluten sensitivity or anything who's tried that, who's had a problem, right?
Hmm.
Nor is anybody who's tried our breads, which also have this modern variety in it, have they had a problem? Okay, in fact, people who have gluten sensitivities, and some people in my family who trust me who have celiac, they've tried this and they feel fine. And so what that tells me is that it can be part of the problem. Part of the story is how we bastardize gluten. But the rest of it, I think, is there's a bigger story in there about glyphosate. Okay, glyphosate, it's like Roundup, and it's meant to dry out, kill, desiccate. It's meant to kill everything around it, and a lot of farmers use it to get a predictable drying of their grain so they can harvest it on time, right? And so if it's not organic wheat, organic grain, or vegetables for that matter, it's probably got glyphosate all over it. And so what it, in my very simplistic view of what happens is when you eat any sort of wheat or flour, or crackers or cookies that has glyphosate on it, and it goes down and it kills your microbiome. It just bleaches it out, right? And you're going to have problems if your gut's not healthy. And so I do think that if you've got glyphosate out of the equation, people are like your stomach's not going to be rumbling or anything else. And then you think about like, is this identity preserved? Is it a complete clean supply chain? I've been to some of these grain, you know, cleaning facilities and storage facilities, and it's about every type of grain you named, all just added in, blended up
Hmm.
together, brought in on trucks. It's been fumigated, sitting out. There's rodents in it. There's bugs. That's what we're eating. Like you have this nice
Hmm.
shiny packaging, but a lot of what we eat out there, the cheap food in particular, has been fumigated. It's old. It's mixed, right? It some of it has mold in it, but like there's like tolerances for what you can have. Ours, it's a single estate. It's like single estate coffee or chocolate. We grow the wheat, we plant the wheat, we grow it organically and regeneratively. We grow it, we harvest it, we clean it ourselves, we mill it with a partner that we know, back in our own packaging, and then it goes into the finished products. And so we know, and by the way, we include transparency, like a QR code on the packaging, so you can see exactly when each of those tasks was performed and who did it and
Oh, that's
when.
awesome.
And so it really exceeds a label. Like today, everyone's shopping, oh, it's just organic or whatever. But what if every package showed you what the seed was, who planted it, where they planted it, like by location, who harvested it, when they trucked it, when they milled it, when they put it into the finished products, and they delivered it to you. Wow. Like
Yeah.
part of the reason that nobody else is doing this, or very few people is doing it, is because there's a big problem with the way our food's made. Okay, in every layer, and so I think we're going to put regenerative organic certified as a label on the front of it, and so that gets people's attention. But I really encourage consumers to be smarter consumers and to ask all the questions, and to only buy the products where you get a good answer about where your food came from. Because if you can't get an answer, you can probably assume it's not good for you, and it's been there's and all of those things added together are what make you feel like hell, right? When you eat that stuff. So I guess I would say, like to me, it's the Coke and Pepsi challenge. It's like if you have a gluten problem, buy one of my pancake mixes, eat a pancake, right?
Yeah.
Okay, if you're doing okay with that, make a loaf of sourdough bread, eat a slice, eat a nibble, and I guess I would just say, like, I want to hear from anybody who says I made it the right way and I had a problem, because I actually don't think that, I mean, kind of put a challenge in. I don't think there's many people who will have a problem. I don't want anybody to do anything dangerous for their health, and they should, if they have a question, they should talk to their doctors. But I guess I'm just saying that like food can be our best medicine. And when we have food grown or regeneratively or organically, with there's literally no chemicals at all of any type used on our crops, and then we give you the whole grain, or we're going to give you the whole mesquite bean, or we're going to give you the sheep, the lamb prosciutto, or whatever it is. Like, it literally is just nature working her magic put into a finished product you can put into your system. And I almost don't think that it's fair to compare like regeneratively or regenerative organic certified food to their counterparts. Like it's almost like an entirely different product. Like
Hmm.
my pancakes are not the same thing as you fill in the blank other pancakes. The milk that Hartquist or that Alexander Family Farms puts out, the full fat, dairy raised, it's not the same thing. And it takes a lot more work to get it. So, I think we're at this kind of a renaissance. Maybe I'm kind of playing off the name of your podcast, but like we're in a renaissance of the staples:
Hmm.
bread, milk, pancakes, flour, salt. We're starting over. It's like version 2.0. It's like web 3. We're
Yeah.
back to food 2.0. Or going back, it's like food 0.0, the way it should have been, as opposed to how we've messed it up over time.
Yeah, no, that's great. And now I can also see why you like Bitcoin with verification, but also questioning a lot of things. So I'm curious with the processing, if you could just go in more detail about what it actually looks like for washing, but then also milling and explaining stone milling for those that don't know what that means.
Yeah, for sure. So we take a combine, drive through the fields, and it gathers up all the wheat, okay, and it shakes off a lot of the chaff. That all goes just into like a truck that we send to a grain cleaning facility, which just uses air and like the weight of the grain versus the chaff, to just blow off all of the excess. We're just left with the clean wheat, right? And then we take the extra cracked seeds and the chaff, and that's like chicken. It can be like chicken feed. But we take that grain and we send it to a mill, Karen Spring Mills, Barton Spring Mills, and they have stones. They have milling stones that they use uh, to kind of grind the wheat to where you can retain all of the oils and the bran and the germ, and rather just like getting beat up, it's you grind it up, and so the finished product has like all those nice oils and polyphenols and other things in it. You get the bran and the germ, right? And we encourage more people to eat the whole grain, like the whole wheat. Um, but you end up with just all of the parts of the wheat, except maybe you scrape off, if you don't want the whole wheat, maybe you shave off some of the bran and the germ, some small portion of it. Um, but the wheat has the bran and the germ and the endosperm, and even things like the preservation or like the anti-inflammatory uh, um, um, what would you call it? The measures that the wheat normally has in itself. Like you only get the advantage of if you eat the whole thing, right? Like the
Hmm.
wheat kernel is meant to be used in full, but the in the wheat business or the flour business, there's a lot of fudging, I think, that goes on where people will call something whole wheat, where they'll take the bran and the germ off of it, and then they go like bake it. They like sterilize almost that bran and that germ, and then they just take the endosperm and then they reintroduce the like the bran or the germ into it, as opposed to, and then they call it whole wheat, right, where it's been separated, sterilized, whatever, and then they even go further, sometimes adding vitamins, it's enriched, right,
Yeah.
right. And so stone milled um, whole wheat grain, it tells you that you've got like all the parts of the wheat that was there, and it hasn't run through some other process. It's just been ground up and put into a bag, and you can smell the difference
Hmm.
and taste the difference.
That's interesting. So I'm curious too, from a strategic standpoint, I know you kind of talked about this a little bit with the pricing, especially because that was one thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I worked on a farm last fall in Pennsylvania, a rural town, and they're regenerative as well. And I just remember hearing on the farmers markets, because I was in charge of a lot of those, they would have conversations with me and they're really questioning everything. Why our corn, for example, was $2 more than the corn next to us, but they were conventionally raised
Mm-hmm.
and they sprayed everything. So I'm curious from your standpoint, because you're more of the financial and strategy, how are you going about that in terms of your pricing and trying to really get that out there and sell?
Mm-hmm. Well, first I'll say that we haven't cracked that code, right? Like that we have as a country and really just as a whole world,
Yeah.
we have commoditized food where we've also we create like financial instruments around food so that like there are people just are in they're just in the investment management space who are speculating in the price of wheat and corn, and we've standardized the prices, which separates those prices from the reality of where you grow it and all the various costs and costs to grow it, right? So just as an example, like in Montana, you can do dry land farming. So you don't have to have any irrigation on it, right? You can plant it and Mother Nature will like grow it. Well, okay, so in those situations, I mean, I'm paying thousands of dollars a month to pump water from a well, and and then we also have like for instance in our ground we have a lot of like invasive species like Bermuda grass where the amount of wheat that pops up because it's competing with other species is actually smaller, right? And so at the end of the day, that like just like the techniques that we use, for instance, regenerative currently while we're rebuilding the soil means we're focusing on improving the soil and all of the cycles, like the water cycle and the carbon cycle, the nutrient cycle. And so our yield might be 3 or 4 times less than somebody who just puts like chemical fertilizers on it and they rip the ground and they till it, right? So first of all, we're getting significantly less per acre. And then our circumstances change, right? Like we have to pay electricity where somebody else doesn't, that it just adds up, right? The costs go. So like everybody's gotten trained, like even in Phoenix, like in the Phoenix metropolitan area, Arizona, where people are like people who use a lot of wheat, pizza makers and bakers and everybody else, they're just used to buying a standard product from one of the large mills that services a lot of the country. And so like we've made flour like there's like a certain price for that. It's like okay, 63 cents a pound is what people expect to to use. But what they don't realize is that wheat's not coming from their state. It's not coming from their community, right? It's coming from someplace else that in other places, sometimes even internationally, that's been heavily subsidized. And so what we do is just first of all explain that we are regenerative organic certified and that we explain all the costs that go into it and we welcome people to come out to the farm and see it, right? And then we just ask them like we'll taste it and see how you feel. And I mean, do you care about where the world's headed, yes or no? Because for me it's almost binary that way, right? Like if people and most consumers don't know this, right? And that's why your podcast and others are so valuable, is that you start to educate people about like food and how to make choices amongst them. But most people just don't understand like the price they pay for food is like artificially low, and that if you continue doing what we're doing, we're going to the farming practices are going to continue the way they are, which means we're running into a brick wall, right? And so we're saying, well, we've changed the practices. This is the price currently as we pivoted the corner. I'm committed as a farm owner and a brand owner to give consumers the benefit of reduced costs after the land gets abundant and I'm not having to put fertilizers in it. We'll bring that cost down. But to kickstart the engine, you kind of need to go back and have a conversation with your farmer. Like, well, why is it expensive? Right? And people should not be surprised that it costs 3 times as much as the
Hmm.
conventional product. Okay. Well, if people start to understand, well, that's it. And what if they have to spend? I mean, by the way, if you spend that much more, maybe you spend 2/3 more for the amount of money you spend on flour. What's that going to be for a household? $100, right? A year, $200, right? So even if you're talking about $500 or $600, right, that you end up coming out of pocket, what could your offsetting savings be on your medicine and your health care, right? And your lifespan, right? And so it comes down to like, which do you value most? And but that's where like you gotta people have to find the real deal, the authentic product that's better, and not be fooled by it. But we welcome all the scrutiny, and I'm happy to lay out the books for anybody who wants to know exactly what the costs went into it. And for me, it's about keeping farming alive, agriculture alive in Arizona, because I care about the farming lifestyle. I care about the cowboy culture. And if we continue the course we're on, we're going to end up with just developments, condos and neighborhoods, and no farms. And to me, that is like the worst possible outcome.
I definitely agree with that. I think that's a good segue into talking a little bit about Bitcoin because I'm curious what I guess yeah, what got you into Bitcoin and how do you see that play out in the world of agriculture and farming?
Mm-hmm. So I started my career as a technology lawyer and um, immediately got into the technology that relates to money and financial services. So as a lawyer, I've dealt with things about mobile payments and payment processing and local coupons and you name it, all these various things that anytime you're dealing with money, like on an app or on an online service, I've done that work. I advised around things like money transmission and anti-money laundering and sanctions and help people navigate those laws and those rules. And so when Bitcoin popped onto the scene, in 2009, it was actually like a thing that people could get a hold of. The very earliest entrepreneurs who were building businesses around it, like exchanges and brokerages and wallets, they came to me for help to understand how to build a business so that they wouldn't go to jail, right? To deal with the laws.
Hmm.
And so I became familiar with Bitcoin at that time. And so this is
Wow.
part of really my work of advising these entrepreneurs and these innovators. I need to know how it worked. And so I looked into Bitcoin. I bought Bitcoin. I played with Bitcoin. And then there are other protocols that came out. And to me, it was just part of my job. But I recognized that this was an alternative to the existing payment system, financial system, right? Like that Bitcoin, today it's a lot easier to see what it is than what we even understood it to be back in 2010. But it's like a bank or like a PayPal that everybody can use, but nobody owns and controls, right? Like it's censor resistant, it's resilient, it's predictable. There's only 21 million Bitcoin that will ever be created, and of course, it's gone up in value because it's useful, right? It's useful as a reliable financial system, right? And it also is more than that. It's a ledgering system. You can use little bits of Bitcoin to keep track of other assets, other types of property, right? So just as a think of like a new operating system and as an asset, it's valuable. And I think that the increases in value have recognized that. Like it's like a useful contribution to the world, and so people have bought it. Um, and so but it got some really interesting, I guess, characteristics, which is, for me at least, I don't think that we've ever seen an asset that has gone up more in value than Bitcoin ever, right? So like there's just an asset that everybody can get access to without needing to be an accredited investor. And you can use it to store value. You can use it to send value. You can use it just as a speculative instrument if you wanted to, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, there's laws around what you can do with it, but but my view is it's money that has gone up significantly in value, and just over my tenure, it did. So, my Farmers Love Bitcoin initiative that I write about at oatmanfarms.com really just encourages farmers of all types to like create a Bitcoin address, right, and to put it out there and encourage people tip them in Bitcoin or pay them a little bit of Bitcoin. If you value what the farmer does, give them a little bit of Bitcoin. And then let's just see what happens. If it turns out that the farmer collects enough Bitcoin and that Bitcoin goes up in value significantly, then that might enable them to transition the farm to organic. It might allow them to pass it on with succession planning. You could do all sorts of things with it. So part of it is just like it's valuable. It's money. It's a new system. And so to me, it's like it's the monetary system that goes along with regenerative agriculture. Like if we're trying to fix the climate, regenerative agriculture fix the soil. Well, let's also fix the financial system so that it works for everybody. That everybody, it's inclusive. And you don't necessarily need to embrace it fully, but like it's nice to have that as an option. And some people, and I think many younger people, are very comfortable living entirely in that crypto DeFi, kind of crypto first environment. And I don't honestly blame them, right? Because it's predictable, they can trust it, and yeah, sometimes you lose money, but you lose money with a lot of the other traditional regulated financial services firms too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that story's still being written, but I would just say that anybody who's just interested in having money, knowing how money works for them, they should look into Bitcoin, right? And they should figure out how it works. They should also look at things like the Lightning Network. The Lightning Network allows people to interact with Bitcoin in smaller amounts and more rapidly. It's called a layer 2 protocol that's built on the Bitcoin protocol. Yeah, but to look into it, and my view is that like it's open, it's decentralized, it's distributed, it's peer to peer. It's money for our time. It's value for our time. There's a lot of other tokens that people can lose a lot of money on, but I think that Bitcoin is probably something that people should look into and consider whether it works for them. But then to anticipate like other ways that we might be able to use Bitcoin, not just try to like pay Bitcoin to people, but how we use blockchain technology and smart contracts to facilitate things like global trade and commerce and instant settlement, conversion between fiat currencies and like farm outputs, and how you might even be able to borrow against your own farmland. And so and then there's things like transparency, where you can record information and quickly see like if information has changed. So there's all sorts of places where ledgers and smart contracts and like the settlement functionality of blockchain technology can be used in non-monetary ways that I think can accelerate the goals of regenerative agriculture and really just like farmer prosperity.
I like that. I mean, the 2 points, the one with blockchain, I agree, because in grad school, one of my capstone project was on blockchain. And that's why I was interested whenever you were talking about just your whole process is out there so you can see all the transparency, because verification is a huge point. I mean, there was the video a couple months ago about all of the cobalt being mined in the Congo for the phones. People don't know, like you just have the phone, you don't think about verification of any of that. When you go to the grocery
Mm-hmm.
store, you expect it to be fully stocked, not a clue where it comes from. And then that goes back to your really good point about the wheat and how you have no idea what all went into the conventional slop, whatever you would call that, put together. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
really great. But then on the flip side too, with Bitcoin, why I'm so bullish on that, especially from the value perspective, it gives the power back to us. And with farming and whatnot, especially from a financial standpoint, how difficult that is, how difficult it is to start one, how difficult it is to transition from conventional to implementing more organic and regenerative practices. That's very costly. And
Mm-hmm.
so I love that you're doing that, because that's such a great way to think long term with your farm, but also gives you the ability to have some of those realistic options in the future.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, let me say
yeah.
a couple things on that. So there, like a long time ago, maybe it was 5 or 6, 7 years ago, I read a report from Gartner, and Gartner does like the hype cycle reports.
Hmm.
And there are two things that stood out to me. One, they said blockchain technology is transformative. Okay. Actually, there's three things that stood out. One, it's transformative. Second, they said it's going to create at least $3 trillion worth of new value. And third, they said that it's going to get started in earnest in 2028. Okay. And and so what I gathered from that, first of all, is okay, well, like blockchain technology, even back then, was forecast to create $3 trillion worth of new value. Well, $3 trillion worth of new value directed into like big problems like health, environment, farmer welfare, justice, education systems. Like we could transform this world. Like there's a lot of the hard problems we haven't been able to figure out how to solve that we might be able to solve with this new amount of money, this new toolkit, right? And so I think we need more people thinking about blockchain and crypto, Bitcoin, not just hey, how do I make some more money off of it, but how do I leverage that to change the world, make it a better place, right? And there are companies like Producers Market that I use for that transparency tool. There's a thing called Storybird. You know, the guys at Gcoin, Emergent Payment, like back to your Cobalt example, right? Like this is a company that used blockchain technology to demonstrate that the gold that like pulled out of mines is responsibly sourced all the way through from the mine to the refinery and then all the way down to like the gold whatever it is like a gram that
Hmm.
makes it in like all the iPhones,
Yeah.
right, where like you can or on the jewelry that's on your finger you can tell this is not conflict gold, is no child labor, all, and so why not apply that? Like we've applied that technology to gold, which is like the most valuable resource ever, but now apply it to things like food, right? And where food comes from. Um, AgroToken is another example. They're down in Argentina and and Brazil, right? Where they've essentially created a new they've solved a monetary problem by creating essentially like a stable coin out of like a ton of corn or wheat or soy. Uh, where like their peso is very like unreliable, but like farm crops could be reliable, right? So we're able to solve problems in different parts of the world. There's like a lot of interest in blockchain in Africa right now too. A lot of innovation happening, and so I think we should just be thinking about where different problems exist and watch where the solutions come in. In the United States, blockchain is often viewed as like a solution search for a problem, but there are places really all over the world where there are problems where maybe this is the right solution, and then we can sort of expand it. So I keep trying to convene gatherings of people who are interested in blockchain technology and advanced technologies like AI, generative AI, and regenerative agriculture, and get them together to have the conversation. There's some really interesting companies out there.
Hmm. Well, that's great. And outside of that, is there anything that you'd like to share with the audience of where to find you at?
Yes, thank you. We would love you to support our direct-to-consumer model by going to oatmanfarms.com to buy our products there. The farmers make the most money when you buy directly from them. We're also on Amazon. You can search for Oatman Farms on Amazon, and we are in the Whole Food stores in Arizona and in other places. Like if you're in Arizona, go support our friends at Arizona Wilderness Brewery or Chompies. They're using our flour in all sorts of really interesting ways, like soft pretzels and chicken and waffles. And so any way you support it or drink the beer, whatever it is, but like any way you consume it, you're helping us.
Well, awesome. Thank you again,
So
Dax, for joining.
my pleasure. Thank you for a great conversation.